let's go ahead and get started with this. Thank you all again joining. I I get a lot of questions about CFPs. I love reviewing CFPs for people. I also write a fair amount of them, and so I wanted to use this space with some other amazing experts on these topics to hear their experience. Some people on the panel have been doing reviews of CFPs. I've done a few for like KubeCon and a few different conferences, but I think we have a pretty good variety of where people have submitted talks, given talks, and reviewed talks. So I think there's a lot of great resources here for anyone that is kind of looking to start doing public speaking, kind of getting over that first hurdle of just what it means to do some public speaking. And I will be sharing some links in the space here at the top if you scroll up once we get started here. So I'll go ahead and start with myself. Intros just across the panel of I wanted to start with the question of give me an intro to yourself and what's the favorite talk you've ever seen or talk that you've given, and just to kind of give the audience also a little bit background on yourself to if they want to see where you've given talks or things that you like seeing, go ahead and send those to me in the DM too and we'll share those. So I've been speaking for 15 years or so, 14 years at various meetups, smaller conferences, and only a few like semi-large conferences. I don't have a ton of talks. I wouldn't, I know public speakers that have a lot of talks that I think of as like 50 plus to 100, somewhere in there. And I'm probably in the like couple dozen talks. So I'm no expert here, but I do like helping people learn. And now it's also part of my profession working at Amazon. And I will say that my favorite talk that I've ever given was actually my KubeCon talk from last year, just because it was different than all of my other talks, and I really enjoyed the format that I was able to play with it. So I have a lot of other plans with that sort of format, but the whole remote only conferences actually to me was very freeing in the type of talk I gave. So I will obviously put a link here. And Allie, go ahead and go next while I get some links, and you can send them to me in DMs too.
Awesome. I am on the spot. Oh my goodness. Just as I unmute, my dog decides to start squeaking a toy. Classic. So I am Allie. I am a senior developer advocate at AWS. I work on the Amplify team, and I have been speaking at events for maybe like 4 years, but I've spoken at probably like 70, 80 events, something like that. I normally do like 2 to 7 a week, so it's a lot of speaking. I don't do a ton of CFPs anymore, which I can talk about in a little bit if that's helpful. But some of my favorite talks are Your Perfect Tech Talk by Saran Yitbarek. She's just like the best speaker in our industry, I feel like, and always so polished. And so her advice on speaking goes a huge ways. Favorite talk that I've given was along the same lines as as Saran's talk is at Code Newbie. I talked about writing blog posts and my history behind that, and I think that was a really great talk. And in order to speak at that conference, you have to go through a couple rounds of coaching, and I think that was really helpful to have somebody objectively look at the talk beforehand and go through that. So I'll pass it off to Addie.
Thanks, Allie. Hi, everyone. I'm Addie. I'm a senior cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. I specialize in distributed data and machine learning. So what I'm thinking about CFP, so Justin, I'm a little bit like you. I didn't do a ton of conferences. When I submit a CFP, I really think ahead about the conferences, the audience, and what the message that I want to convey. And since it's part of my role, I see myself also as an educator. So I have the chance to help people learn and onboard into the space of machine learning and data. One of the talks that I like most is actually not a technical one. This talk is by Simon Lancaster. He's a speechwriter, and he did a TED talk. I think he had like a couple of million views, and he talks about rhetoric. And one of the things I took away from it was the role of threes at presentations. So when you do put a slide or when you build up your message, he explains why it's good to have only 3 words or repeat the same words 3 times. So, for example, education, 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 with a specific rhetoric.
I'm gonna need a link to that because that sounds awesome. Taylor, oh, go ahead, Addie. Oh yeah, Taylor or Addie,
Okay,
go ahead and send me that link because we'll bring that into the space. And then Taylor, go ahead.
yeah. So hi, I'm Taylor Barnett. I've probably been giving talks for about 8 years now. I've been on a few program committees for like API the docs and API strategy and practice, and which is now defunct, but now has moved on to API specifications conference. And then that turned into also being the program chair for API specifications conference last year, and again this year, but also acting as the conference chair. So have probably looked at hundreds and hundreds of CFPs that people have submitted over the years, good and bad. Or maybe not bad, misdirected. They needed help or assistance writing them. That would be probably a nicer way to say it. Favorite talk that I've given, I don't know if I have like a favorite. I just like had that I like enjoyed putting together more than others. This year I gave my first keynote at DevOps Days Texas. It was kind of sad that it was my first keynote, but it was in a virtual world. But because I felt like I really couldn't like absorb how awesome that felt personally, but it was still really great. And it was about glue code and glue work, and then all the different problems that we have with using, APIs and more like different form of complexity in our systems today. And then my favorite, I don't know, have exact favorite. I have a lot of speakers I just like in general, like any of their talks, but I'd say Jen Schiffer's talks are amazing because they're hilarious and technical and so many things in one. So she's given multiple talks at places like XOXO and different, I think probably some different JavaScript conferences. I've seen her at an API conference. They're just really entertaining talks. Yeah. Noah, maybe?
And real quick,
oh, go ahead.
Taylor, like I watched your glue code talk, which is actually how I kind of found you because I read the article and I saw that talk and I thought it was great. So you did a phenomenal job, and one of the main reasons I started following you and wanted to bring you into this space as well.
Yeah, that talk was really intense too because so for context, everyone, I live in Austin, Texas. The week before, well, literally, I was supposed to record that talk. I lost power for 4 or 5 days because of the winter storm. I had to leave my house. It was all sorts of chaotic. And then I came back that weekend and was like, okay, I got to record this talk. I'm like 5 days late on this. And so I'm really happy that it still like turned out fine because it was so many anxieties about keynoting and the storm and just like everything not being okay in my state. Yeah, it's intense.
Noah, go ahead.
Okay, so hi, I'm Noah. I am open source advocate over at Stormforge. I've been public speaking since I was a wee bairn, but have gotten back into the conference, meetups, and general presentation circuit over the past few years, 4 or 5 years, when I got back into open source with Kubernetes. I've spoken at conferences. I've spoken at a lot of meetups. I'm based in Las Vegas, so I end up spending a lot of time at conferences when they are a thing, unlike right now. So I am also on program committee for a handful of conferences and other such places. And I've never given a keynote. In fact, very few of my talks have ever been accepted, which is, I think, useful information on what works and what doesn't work. As for favorite talks, the favorite talk that I've ever seen, and this is totally not pandering, is one that Justin gave at KubeCon a couple years ago. It was the one with the balloon animals, because it was absolutely amazing to take an entire crowd and have them laughing while they are learning all of the important concepts. It was just a fantastic presentation. And anytime I think that you can take the audience and get them engaged and have them away from feeling like it's a talk and have it feeling more like it's, you know, you're speaking directly to them and you're presenting something to them, it makes it much easier to get that across. So as a talk, I really love that one. The favorite talk that I've ever given is probably thankfully not recorded. It was a couple of years ago, and I did a presentation of every single CNCF project in 90 minutes. And it was basically just rapid fire bad jokes. So it's for the best that it was not recorded, because no one should ever see it. But it was hilarious and a lot of fun. And I'll pass it over to Jordan.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much. Hey, everyone, I'm Jordan Adler. I'm the head of developer engineering over at OneSignal. And I've been doing software engineering for about maybe like 15 years, a little over that now. But I've only really been talking in kind of public context for a little over 10 years. And that stems really because, 10 years ago, I was organizing the Perl meetup group out of New York, which was a lot of fun. And of course, even at that time, the Perl community was quite small. And so I had to kind of fill in gaps and make sure that we kept our monthly cadence going so that people kept showing up. Otherwise, I'd have no one to drink with. And that's a problem. Favorite talk I ever gave was at PyCon, actually. I gave a talk when I was over at Pinterest about our conversion from Python 2 to Python 3. And, what I really liked about that talk was it had been done, frankly, hundreds of times before I kind of got there. And I did it with a colleague of mine named Joe Gordon, and we had kind of a good on-stage dynamic. But more importantly, I think we were able to take material that in a topic area that was kind of well-worn at that point in time and come up with new and interesting ways to present information and even come up with new kinds of information, which was a fun challenge and a self-imposed constraint, really, right? Like I said to myself, hey, I want to talk about this journey that we took, and so many other people have taken those journeys before us, but how can I bring something unique to the table? How can I bring something new to the table and not be, repeating the same kinds of thing? And I think we did a pretty good job of that.
All right, and honestly, the Python 2 to 3 is a story that you can tell pretty much every conference, and people will still come and learn new things. It is an ongoing saga, even if Python 2 has been deprecated or no longer supported as of, I think it was last year, or was it this year? January, I think, of this year was finally the deprecation. So, yeah. Thank you all. If you have links to any of those talks, go ahead and tweet them out and then send them in a DM so I can share them here in the space. And so moving on to kind of the next question for anyone in the audience too is how do you all find a conference to speak at or open CFP? What do you use, any tools, any websites? Do you have communities? How are you finding those places with opportunities to speak and tell your story?
I think it's a great question, and it really depends. For me, for many of the cases, it was mostly around community. So in the data and AI space, there's Locally Optimistic that talks about distributed system and concurrency. There are other communities that specifically talk about TensorFlow and the space of distributed machine learning. And it was really useful to discover new conferences and also understand who speaks there, what the level they're expecting, from a potential speaker. So that was really helpful. Another place that it's helpful is developeravocados.net. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a weekly email, so you can sign up, and they send out CFPs and different resources on how to become a better speaker. So they collect tips, they collect best practices, and they send it out every week. So if someone wants to do it more professionally, definitely sign in to learn more about that. And I'll share the link.
I
Awesome.
just found it.
That was one of the ones.
I've never seen this site before. This is great.
Awesome. That was one of the ones that I was going to shout out to, but there's also DevRel Weekly, which also will have CFPs on it sometimes. Papercall.io. They're a whole entire platform for CFPs. CFP Land is another one that you can sign up for. But my biggest random tip is to actually open source your call for papers. So your CFPs, I have them all on a GitHub repository, and I use that mainly to get invited speaking. So instead of me submitting to conferences, I send this to people when they ask me to give a talk, or if I see something, some tweet like asking for meetup speakers or something along those lines. So then I have all of this work that I've done in order to apply for one conference open source and written down so that I can send those over and over and over again to different conferences if I ever need to, or if I need to have a bio or a description for a talk or something along those lines. It's all there for me in one place. So I will tweet all those links.
The other two that, oh God, sorry, Dustin.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say I got all those. I just put them in a tweet here in the space. I didn't know you had to open source your CFPs, because I did the same thing, but I've never thought to actually send them to people. I just did it as I was keeping track of things I'd done in the past.
That's why I started it forever ago. Is I was like, oh, this is just in order to teach other people how to write a CFP, and then it evolved into just my speaking hub, and I use it whenever I'm supposed to speak at something. I just send them that whole repository. It has like my bio, my pictures, all of that. It makes my life so much easier.
The other one I would add is tracking things on events.linuxfoundation.org. Linux Foundation has so many different events that follow now under like their larger roof. It used to be, I'd say, a little bit more, I mean, still is a bit more infrastructure heavy, stuff like that, but there's now so many other orgs under Linux Foundation, basically, and groups and stuff. So there's like so many different topics of events, and their events page also like has links directly to which ones like are accepting speakers, which is super helpful. And then the other thing I would say, if like the DevOps world of talks, which honestly, DevOps Days is a wide range of talks. So I would hope people don't like limit themselves if you just don't think that your talk is a DevOps talk. But going to DevOps Days website and seeing all the events, especially because some of those can be super local, which is awesome, especially as things start to open up more again too.
I want to take 1 second and go back to something that Addie mentioned just about community and about being part of the whole ecosystem. I think when you're looking for places to get involved, just getting involved in anything makes you part of the zeitgeist. It makes you part of the ecosystem, such that when you have conversations with people in the future, you can say, hey, what other conferences are you speaking at? What other conferences are out there? What should I be paying attention to? And it becomes something that shows up more on your radar without having to necessarily do a lot more hunting, because now you're part of the speaker conglomerate.
especially for local stuff with meetups. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's funny that normally when we would have this conversation, like maybe 2 years ago, probably the first place that a lot of us would have said is meetup.com, because local meetups are a great place to get started with your first talk, your 10th talk, if you're just trying out some new idea. And now, like, some of them are still doing online stuff locally, but some have kind of just paused. Um, definitely when they start picking up speed again, looking up local meetups for relevant communities to things you might want to talk about is another one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of speaking meetups. I think oftentimes, especially as being a historical meetup organizer, I know how hard it is to get people to show up every month and have good content. And really, when you're organizing a meetup, you're there for the community, as a meetup organizer, in ways I think that are not always the same for conference organizers, where you might have kind of more concrete business goals, right? Meetups are really about the community in a more pure way. And I think being available to be there, especially because it's often a much smaller group, it's a lower pressure environment. It's a great way to workshop a talk in progress. I really love working at meetups. Not only do you get more face-to-face time with people, but oftentimes you make good friends and meet people who want to join your company, right? That's a huge part, at least for me as a manager, when I think about going to meetups, is meeting people who might be good candidates for joining the company.
I'm gonna second that, because I'm also a meetup organizer, and there were years that were lean enough where we had 11 meetups and I gave 8 of them because we couldn't get enough speakers and people weren't coming to town that year. So if you think that there's anything that you want to put out there, I mean, maybe the Bay Area Kubernetes meetups might be a little tough to get into, but in general, if you have a talk that you want to give, talk to your local meetup organizers. I am 95% certain they would be ecstatic to have you come give whatever talk it is, and usually to help you give the talk as well.
And I would throw out there, by the way, if you're not sure what you want to talk about, but you think you have something interesting people might want to hear, just ask. Ask the meetup organizer, hey, what topics are people interested in hearing about? What do you need more speakers on? And they'll give you insights. And I think that can also be a great way just to develop a talk. If you've never given one before, ask them, hey, what do people want that they're not getting these days? And can I, slap something together quickly, show it at the meetup, get some feedback, and evolve it. Not unlike a stand-up comedian tries out their new stuff at little comedy clubs here and there, and then works that into something that becomes a bigger performance on stage.
So that leads to an interesting question that I think I want to put to the speakers at large. How many of you build talks with the intent of reusing them? I myself, I don't think I've ever given the same talk twice. I've never reused a talk. What are folks doing from the people that are here? Are you reusing your talks, or are you writing everything fresh? And from that perspective, what do you think is good for the people who are attending here?
Yeah, for me, I re-give talks a ton. It allows me to scale better. I normally do like 3 to 4 talks per year so that I can reuse them, and then I retire them when I'm sick of giving them or think that they've been oversaturated. So that's my strategy, is that if I can redo them over and over again, then they get better as talks, and I get to see what people are asking in those talks and then integrate that into the talk itself so that I can answer all those things up front for people and polish the demos, make everything so that it flows really well. And for me, it's just easier to have a couple talks instead of starting from scratch for every single one. But I think that this changes also if you do this as part of your job. Like, I do this as developer advocate as part of my day job, and so I have to do a lot of speaking, and so it doesn't scale super well if I'm writing a new talk for every single conference that I do. That being said, like at the very beginning of my speaking career, when I did like 1 or 2 talks per year, then I would write them from scratch. But right now, with my current speaking schedule of doing like multiple events a week, it just wouldn't scale.
Yeah,
For
I've sort
me,
of evolved a bit on this. Like before, I used to be like, well, if it's recorded and put online, why would I repeat it if people could just go online and like watch it? And I had been convinced by enough people that, there were talks that were very much worthy giving multiple times in different audiences because not everyone's going to go online and look up that talk. So it really started becoming like, if it was a talk that felt like appealed to a lot of audiences, I would try to make sure to give it to a lot of different audiences, trying not to repeat always exact audiences. And so then I started moving to like in 2019, I think I had like one talk that I pretty much gave like 4 or 5 times. I'll sometimes do for different audiences, I'll do modifications. Say I have language like code examples, maybe, I'll change it for if that community is like the PHP community versus Python community or stuff like that. Other parts of the talk that might be more relevant to one community versus the other. But I mean, if you're someone just getting started out, I think one strategy is develop actually multiple talks and submit those multiple times and see which one gets people interested. And then actually, like when I say develop, I mean like write a good outline, write the abstract, stuff like that. And then actually write the talk later once it gets accepted. So then you can kind of feel out like, oh, this topic seems like a lot of people are interested in it. This topic, less people are interested in, versus just like trying to put all bets on one thing.
and I'll echo that a little bit, where a lot of the talks I've given, I do modify them. I try to focus on like a demo or a tool, and then I can reuse some of that content that I learned either from an API or a library and change that for that audience. If it's a meetup or if it's a different language, community or something, I will take what I learned. So I don't have to learn from scratch every time, but I can reuse what I've been learning in a different message. And but to your point earlier, the KubeCon talk I gave where we built Kubernetes with a spreadsheet, that was actually the third time I had given that talk. I had given it once internally at my company. I'd given it once at a meetup, actually in Texas before KubeCon, and then I gave it once at KubeCon when it was recorded. And then I basically retired the talk, to Taylor's point, because I thought, oh, it's recorded, I never need to use that again. But I actually use the components of using some like using props and telling the story over and over again in smaller conversations, but I don't actually give that full talk anymore. I just use pieces of it to help explain concepts and to reshape that message for an audience depending on what level they're at.
I also started doing the very cursed thing of 2 years ago. I started drawing slides. I got inspired by somebody I'd seen draw their slides. I'm not an amazing artist. I can sketch some things out, and I started doing that, and it made creating slides a lot harder. But it also made it a lot more intentional, and I had other benefits, even though it took a little bit more time. I totally reuse drawings. I 100% will copy and paste because I draw it on an iPad. I will copy and paste drawings and stuff if the thing is like trying to find elements of it, whether that be slides, drawings, whatever that you can reuse is definitely, especially if you're going to do it more than once or twice a year. Definitely should try that.
I love drawing slides as well. Like I don't always like watching people that have drawn slides, but I enjoy making the talks better when I draw them. And my KubeCon talk that I had linked, it's like 15 minutes of actual animation that I drew on my iPad. And so like that was, I forget how many pictures I ended up drawing or copying, but it was thousands of pictures. Long time to do those animations, but I really enjoyed it. Like I didn't feel like I was making a talk anymore. I was, hey, this is a cool thing, I want to try it out. But I reuse either drawings or diagrams that I've made. I have folders of that stuff where I just pick and choose and like, oh, I can modify that other one I made, so I'm not scratch too. And that actually kind of leads us a
Yeah,
little
I
bit
think
into
it's
the
a
next
great.
question. Oh, go ahead, Addie.
Oh, I just want to say I'm with you, Taylor. When I just started, I developed a bunch of CFPs proposals, and then just try them all until something clicked, and then continue iterating on more and more of them. And also, what I've noticed is with time, you kind of develop a style. So your CFP, you develop kind of a signature. Also, the presentation themselves, you develop your own style. And even if you're not using the same talk exactly, just because this is the style that people that you're familiar for, that people know you for. So sometimes it can feel a little bit like, oh, that's slightly similar, or that's the same image, or yeah.
So that finding that style, finding your voice, and finding those lessons leads us right to this next question of how do you come up with those topics? And can you give us one tip that you have for writing your title and abstract for the entire panel? And for everyone that is raising your hands, go ahead, keep raising them. After this question, we'll start taking some Q&A. I see that queue coming in. I just want to get through these few questions first. So Ali, we'll start with you. When either someone comes to you with, hey, we want you to speak at this conference, or you want to submit a talk, how do you that message you want to tell, and can you give anyone a tip on writing that title and abstract?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, starting out, I was blogging before I started creating conference proposals or speaking at conferences. And so my early talks were adaptations of my blog posts. And honestly, they still are because I think the idea of like repurposing content in different formats for different people who are in different places and who have different learning styles is really, really effective, and it makes your research go so much further. And so having that outline of a blog post that I could kind of adapt into a talk was really helpful. That being said, I think adding more stories into a talk is more effective and will hook people more. So the format changes what you actually speak about, but having that blog post of a topic that I was already comfortable with helped a lot when I was starting out. And that's what I would do. Like if somebody asked me to speak at a local meetup or something like that. I used to live in Washington, D.C., and they were like always looking for meetup speakers. And I guess I said yes too much. So I would get approached a lot on those. And so I would just send them like my blog and be like, okay, pick which blog topic you want me to convert into a talk. And I would do that. And so I think that that's a really helpful way for getting started. I also think just telling your stories of what you're passionate about, the things that get you fired up, the things that you're working on that are unique that you could tell as a story to somebody else. Even your story of getting into tech. I've seen so many conference talks that are that, or your advice for your career or blogging or any of these things. It doesn't have to be this extremely technical talk. In fact, I find it more intimidating to do the more personal ones than the more technical ones because you can kind of hide behind the code in a way. But I think thinking about what you do, what you know really well that you can teach to somebody else, I think that that's super important. But there's also the idea of like conference-driven development, where you pick a topic that you're a little bit less of an expert on so that you can really challenge yourself to be an expert at that thing by the time that you give the talk. I think there's some validity to that as well.
I'm gonna chain on to that because I think you brought up a really good point about what you yourself are interested in, and I think really early on in the process of writing a CFP, a lot of people look at it and say, "Well, yeah, that's cool, but I don't know if anybody would be interested in hearing it. I don't know if anybody would be interested in actually seeing this as a talk." If it's something that you yourself are interested in, you can pretty much guarantee someone else is also going to be interested in it. And 90% of the talks that I end up giving, they end up being something where I say, well, it's not really that interesting. There's not a lot going on here. But once you start digging into it and start building a talk around a particular topic, then you find that what you thought wasn't that interesting, what you thought was just sort of de rigueur, boring aspects of going about, whatever it is, writing code, doing an installation, talking about a particular behavior. Those things start to come out as points that you can really put down on paper and put down into slides, and you get a really useful, interesting talk out of it just because it's something that you thought was interesting and you feel passionate about it. So
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to echo it and say, the things you struggle most is probably the things that are, other people are struggling as well. And this is always a good place to start. It's like, where do you spend most of your time when you are developing code? Where do you think there is not enough information? When you search for a specific exception or specific problem or specific architecture and you can't find enough information, that means, that it's an opportunity for developing a talk, for writing a CFP on that topic, and it's a good start. And for title, I believe in making things very clear for title and abstract. So I'm reviewing CFPs for Data and AI Summit, previously Spark Summit. And part of our guidelines is to make it very clear which technologies you're going to talk about, what the problem that you're presenting, or maybe future solution, or maybe an opportunity, a technical opportunity that you're presenting, because it's important for us to know what the session is going to be about. Because we greatly care about our community and we want to give them the greatest value. So when you do come up with the things that you are challenging, that you have challenge with, and you decide to write a talk about it, making it clear as possible can really help. Also for you, and also for the committee that later on vote the proposals.
Yeah, often when I'm talking to someone who's like vaguely interested in wanting to submit potentially like their first CFP, it's kind of what some people have been talking about is like they feel like they have nothing to talk about. And it's really hard to, I can tell them you have like a unique perspective. I want to hear that unique perspective. But you have to really start like digging into, I ask them like, write a list of things that you've worked on in the last like couple of years, like no matter how, small challenges that you've had like creative solutions for in technologies that like other people are using, bigger challenges, whole huge re-architectures of things, migrating from one thing to another thing, like all those kinds of things. There's usually something there. It just takes some like putting some words down in a document or a piece of paper to start realizing that some of those things are there. Even for myself, like when I was like trying to work on CFP ideas for this year, which I've kind of like not even really submitted that many this year, but I do have this like list of like, okay, here are the things that I really like would love to talk about this year, or things that I feel like more passionate or like energized, because I'm more likely to like write a better talk if I'm energized to talk about something rather than I'm like dreading it. It takes just a lot of brainstorming, and like it's the kind of brainstorming where you just like write things down and don't even think about it, and then you like can come back to the list and like go through it. I think the one thing about the tip for writing the title abstract, I think I honestly, when I review talks, I don't really pay super close attention to the title. I mean, I might a little bit. It kind of gives me what is the abstract I'm about to a hint to the abstract I'm about to read, and do those two match up? As long as they match up fairly well, then I don't really think much about the title. But the abstract, the big thing for me is just actionable. I'm all about actionable takeaways in my own talks, and I guess I apply this to other people's talks, but it's like, what exactly will someone listening to this talk get out of it? Like, what will be the thing that they will want to go tell their team about, or that's going to somehow make some kind of impact on their work, or just themselves? So it doesn't even have to be their work too. Like, what is that super actionable thing? And if it's just like, oh, I'm going to tell you about how we integrated blank with blank. I'm like, okay, but why is that interesting? Why is that, something I'm going to want to sit down and watch for 30 minutes versus like I could read a 5-minute blog post about it. yeah, like what is all about actionability? Like what is that? And I want to find that in abstracts. And if that is not in an abstract, I will typically give it a lower rating.
That's really a great point, Taylor. And I think like other folks on this panel, I've been on both sides of this coin, right? I've put a CFP out there, received talk proposals, and had to sift through them. And I've submitted many talk proposals as well. And that really informs how I think about topic selection, but also how I think about producing the content and what the actual bulk of the talk is about. And I think about Roman Nurek has a blog post over at Google DevRel about this concept, which is walk then talk, right? Coming from a place of experience and talking about your experience, and kind of taking lessons learned and sharing them in an informative and educational way as being kind of critical to that authenticity. Otherwise, you kind of come across as, hey, everyone, pay attention to me. Here's something I did. And it's just not that interesting. And when I think about talks these days, often what I'll do is I'll look at the agendas from years prior, like the schedules that have happened in the past, as well as whatever the information the conference or event can share about the audience. If I'm going to an event where it's predominantly program language designers, I'm not going to talk about how to use a particular Python feature, but maybe I'll talk about that Python feature and how it relates to other kinds of language features, or how it relates to that same language feature in different languages, right? So I think that there's ways to take the same concept and shape them in a way that's better fitted to the audience and better fitted to kind of what that conference is really presenting to that audience. And to that point, these days, I've gotten in the habit of actually emailing the conference organizers and saying, hey, here's a few talks that I think could be a good fit with the abstract, the bio, as well as the outline. I'll try and give a full outline ahead of time so they know how I'm thinking about presenting that material. And they'll say, okay, you know what, we've got 50 talks on, this particular subject area, REST APIs. Like, we don't need any more REST APIs, but this talk on regular expressions is really interesting and brings something new and maybe fills in a gap in my schedule. Thank you so much for sharing it. That has often been critical to acceptance in my experience.
I've actually been trying to get people to email us and do that. I put our speaker's email on so many things, and I'm seriously, reach out to us. I think there's this weird, we can't talk to them. Sometimes the way people feel when they submit a CFP. But I'm I totally want to hear from them. And I'm not, we already do some blind reviews and stuff. So, there could be some issues, but very rarely I think there would be. I would love to have more people email us and ahead of time and share ideas.
I want to bring that back around to two concepts that both Taylor and Jordan mentioned. One about the idea of actionable items, and the other about the idea of tailoring to your conference, because we in the tech space are not the only people that have CFPs. We're not the only conferences in the world. And there's a lot of overlap with academic conferences. There's a lot of overlap with the academic and educational space with the people that come into tech. And the type of CFPs and the type of papers and talks that get given in something like an academic conference, which some people might be coming into tech, having that experience, it's a very different type of CFP. It's a very different type of talk. I've been working recently with people who have given academic talks who are saying, well, we're used to just putting in, we need to put in point A, B, C, D, and E really quick because we have to cram as much information as possible into this time slot. And that's not what you're looking for. You're not trying to just put down seeds and see what grows. You're trying to really engage with the audience. And by understanding that this is a different type of conference and understanding that this is a different type of presentation, then you have to know to write a different type of CFP as well to go along with that.
On that note, I have a question for the panel. So what do you recommend for people that are totally new, never ever gave an online or talk at a conference, and they are asked for a video? So people on the committee can evaluate if they're capable of presenting.
Just in my experience, just go record yourself giving a presentation about anything. Here's 5 minutes of me on camera talking to you, the review committee, about whatever. Then it's a judge about or a judgment call about how you present, less than how you present this particular topic. That's what I'm usually looking for as program committee. I want to see, is this person an effective speaker, as opposed to, is this person knowledgeable on this topic?
I think you can get some of that from blog posts as well. If I have a blog that someone sends, oh, here's the blog post, what Ali was saying earlier, write a blog post about it, and then I can understand some of your flow and your thinking and how well you connect those dots. And I can make some assumptions that you'll also be able to tell that message on stage. But yeah, I mean, any sort of like, I've done an interview or I've done a podcast or I've done something else would be good just for that in-person sort of, I understand a little more about how you like to present yourself and how you like to give those talks. But for the actual content, a lot of times for me, a blog is good enough. And I will say, like, I think blogs are great also for the accessibility aspect of like these conferences we go to are a lot more exclusionary than I once believed when I was first going to them. And I thought, oh, well, everyone can come to a conference, right? It's like, well, no, like not everyone can travel or take time off, or they have families or whatever. And like having a blog post that is this asynchronous place that someone can read and read it again if they didn't understand it. And those things are really important just to make a lot of this space broader. And so I love that as like a starting point if you want to think about giving a talk, to like see if you can write it down and make a complete blog out of it. Some of my tips around like a title and abstract is actually around I do pay attention to titles, and I think the title needs to have some sort of information or hook to make me want to read the abstract, because as an attendee, I often don't read the abstracts because there's just so many of them. And so I'm skimming titles and I need some sort of like, oh, that looks interesting, or oh, there's either a tool name or a data point or a company or a person or something that I recognize and I say, oh, I want to learn more about that. And then the abstract for me really starts to explain the story arc of where I think the talk is going. And that's whenever people ask me to give CFP reviews, I always focus on literally just like, what's the basics foundations of a story and how do you build a story? And that's around identifiable characters, some sort of like world and a person, some conflict that happened, and then some new state of what the world is like. And that's the story arc that so many things can tell. And I actually just heard this I read a book recently, and they said, like, think of it as like, a dragon story, like a knight's killing a dragon, and you're the company or you're the person, like the sword is the tool, like that's the thing that your company makes, that's the service you provide. And how you tell that story inside of a narrative and an abstract really, really matters. And so if I have 3 or 4 sentences and I say, once upon a time there was a sword, and the sword was the most amazing metal that was harder than anything else in the world. And then a dragon came along and a knight got the sword and killed the dragon. And like, okay, that has that story arc. There's like a thing that I identify with. There's a problem that's this dragon, and there's this new normal. But like, there was no emotion. There was no like, I didn't care that much about the sword. Like the sword wasn't the thing I actually cared about. But you could flip that and say like, once upon a time there was this dragon, and he was minding his own business. But then he came across a town and he was hungry, so he started eating. And some knight came up and jabbed him with a sword, and then he died. And like, okay, that's a different way to tell that story. It focuses on this dragon as like, okay, but still you have that, like the thing you're trying to tell is like about the product, about the sword. And then the real way that you kind of want to tell that story is focusing on the knight. The knight is the identifiable character that everyone can see themselves as. And you say, well, actually I could be in that armor. And you could say, once upon a time there was this knight, and this knight was weak and alone and poor and cried themselves to sleep every night, but they wanted to help their people. And then along came this dragon and was terrorizing their people in the town. The knight went looking across the country and found a sword that was made out of the hardest material on earth. And the knight found the bravery to go back and defeat the dragon. And then the town was saved. And like that story arc focusing on the knight, and the sword is just an implementation tool, and this dragon problem is defeated. That's the story you want to tell inside of these, even in an abstract. You can do that in 3 or 4 sentences, focusing on you as the person, the teller of the story, where you came from, what your problem was, maybe what tool you used to solve that problem, and now what you're able to do after that has happened, and you can go from there. And that's how I like to tell people to craft your CFPs and your abstracts in that way.
I'm going to say 100% on that, because all the best CFPs that I read, both the abstract and, if there's available, the message that you send off to the program committee, it has to be personal. If it's impersonal, then you're like, okay, why do I care? Whether it's the program committee or the person who wants to attend your talk, it has to be personal. It has to be something that you connect with, the same way that you would tell a story to another person. If it's, I mean, you're not going to start your abstract with, okay, so imagine that you might, but you're going to tell it in a much more formal manner. But you still need to have that connection. You still need to have that personal interaction. And remember that you're not submitting this to a stack of papers. You're submitting it to people that are going to read it. So if you want your CFP to be accepted, then the people on the program committee have to look at it and say, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good talk, as opposed to, yes, that's an interesting set of information.
Awesome. So I'm going to open up for Q&A now. Anyone that is coming up, we are recording this space. I was hoping to post it on YouTube later for anyone that's interested. So hopefully, if you're okay with that, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll bring you up to speak. If you're not okay with being up on stage, go ahead and DM me your question, and we can bring that up as well, so that we can just kind of get your question answered and in front of the panel, but also still respect any sort of non-recording that you would like. So Henry, I see you have your hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and bring you up. And I know that sometimes that connection takes a second, so we'll let you, your Twitter space like refreshes basically completely as you like go from a listener to a speaker. So Henry, welcome, and go ahead if you have questions or wanted something to say about CFPs.
And good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'll make this as quickly as possible. I just want to give, first of all, shout outs to the meetup organizers, because the comments that were made about meetups and what they go through looking for speakers is absolutely correct. So thank you very much for making that statement. Which brings me to this as well. For all the new speakers out there, the meetup is a fantastic platform to get started. I feel that people do not look at meetups as often as they should. And that being said, you can start at a meetup with a lightning talk. You know, this is something that I try to convey to people all the time who may have, you know, whatever fears of speaking, which is totally cool. But you can start with a lightning talk, 5-10 minutes, and go about your business thereafter. And, you know, you can get a video from that as well, which then you could also use at the CFP level when you have to apply somewhere. Now, the one thing I did want to mention is the following, and we talked about repeating talks. I'm a big fan of repeating a talk, and I'll tell you why. By show of hands, who likes to go to a concert and listen to a brand new song from their band each and every time? Probably not. And my point there is the following. The best talks are the ones that have been done quite a few times. Just like the best concerts are the ones that are like midway through a tour, maybe at the end of a tour, where the bands have been rehearsing the song or performing the song so much that they know each other's cues. And that's why I'm a big fan of getting people to do the talk more than once, because eventually you could probably give that talk without the slides, you know, and that tends to come through beautifully in a presentation once someone knows their talk inside out. I come from music. It came, you know, I feel like music has completely informed my venture into speaking and to organizing as well. So that's all I want to say.
I would just want to plus one on that and also say that Onready is like one of the best speakers that I've ever seen. So you should definitely take this advice seriously for anybody listening.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And even when I'm doing a talk that I'm going to be giving for the first time at a conference, my practice style is just to do it 20 times, so that by the time I go up there and give it for the first time on stage, I'm just kind of ad-libbing what I've done dozens of times before.
Yeah, I would echo that. Absolutely. It's the more you practice, the better you get at it, and the more you remember and you remember the cues. I also want to echo, Henry, what you mentioned about meetups. So I can share in the Kotlin meetup that I'm organizing. What we did to onboard new speakers is we created a couple of sessions of introduction to Kotlin. And then when someone reached out, or we actually actively reached out to people asking them if they would like to try out to give a talk, we handed them the slides and all the content we already prepared in advance and told them, hey, here is a draft. You can either take it and run with it, or you can style it, add more things to it, and we're going to help you. We're going to coach you basically, and give you feedback. And that really helped with bringing new people that might, don't know exactly what topic to choose, or just want to get a feel of what does it mean to now present. And yeah, absolutely, it's extremely hard being on the organizer side, and this is just one way, one option that we took, that we decided to take to bring in more voices and more people to present.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And here's like, one thing that I do offer is when I spot someone who might have something interesting to talk about, I'll let them know. It's like, okay, let's start with a lightning talk. And I do know some people aren't a big fan of the Q&A section of the talk. Some people have them, some people don't. But the one thing that I've always suggested is like, hey, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna draft two questions, so everything's gonna be prearranged. And after your talk, I'll ask you, hey, what about this? And you'll answer it. Obviously, a more or less prearranged Q&A, but the idea is that I'm going to ensure that, we are creating the best scenario possible for you. From the talk selection, from the talk length at a lightning talk level, and the Q&A section, so that this person can sort of build this confidence, so that later on, you could take the training wheels off, and they may start to take some, live questions and let the bullets fly, right? So I think it's very important to sort of have that kind of situation develop. And again, I can't beat that drum harder enough, is that the lightning talk, I mean, the meetup ecosystem is there to develop these speakers. Look at it as, I don't know if there are any sports fans here, but look at it as, making your way to the NBA through college or through high school basketball. Eventually you make it to the big stage, but you look back at the training you got through like the smaller stages. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing. I just tweeted out one of your previous talks and shared it in the space. So if anyone's interested, it looks great. I did get a question from DM about generally just what are abstracts for someone submitting. Like, there's a lot of terms thrown out in this public speaking space that sometimes isn't always understood, of like, what's the goal of this piece? And some of it is like, I remember a few weeks ago, even there was a in the forum was like, okay, what are your credentials? I was like, wait, do you mean like education credentials? Do you mean my speaking history? What are you asking for? And so anyone care to explain just what's the importance of an abstract in a CFP? And when you're a CFP, by the way, is call for papers, call for proposals to give the talk. But what's the benefit for the committee approving your talk? Why do you have to submit an abstract?
I'm going to harken back to what I said just a few minutes ago, and that's that the the whole point of the abstract is to be able to present it to the audience. That Justin brought up earlier, that sometimes he doesn't get to the abstract. Sometimes he's only looking at the title. But I think it's the combination of the two, that you are trying to sell yourself to the potential viewer, to the potential attendee, and the abstract is really the only means you have to tell them that your talk is going to be worthwhile. That's the whole purpose in my mind. Does anybody have any other counterpoints?
So I think, especially when we're asking for credentials, it's more about to see the video of that person. It can be even 1 minute or half a minute, just to understand, how they convey their message and what story they bring to the table, to know that what stage they're at as a speaker. But I think rather than that, that's I personally don't give too much attention to that, just to know that they are capable of giving and yeah. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if Henry was saying something or just not on mute. Anyone else have questions from the audience? I went through a couple DMs, and also we brought up Henry. If anyone else wants to come up, ask questions about either public speaking or the process there, and even just the conferences in general. I will ask the audience or the panel here one thing too. We mentioned a little earlier about practicing. How are you doing those? Are you in front of a mirror speaking to yourself? Do you find a small audience or some friends? What are you using to give that practice so you feel a little more comfortable? And I don't want to say get rid of the speaking jitters or the butterflies, but just to give yourself a little more confidence in what you're going to say.
I have the biggest Life Pro hack here. So what I do is I practice delivering the talk. I don't normally do it in front of a video or film it or anything like that, though you can. But my trick is I use Otter AI, which is a transcription tool. You could use Google Docs transcription instead or something along those lines. But what it does is it will take the audio recording of you speaking and write it down. And then I use that as my speaker notes for the actual conference. So I don't need to write those out myself, and I can edit them and go back and make them more polished if I want. But I find it really, really helpful to have that fallback. I don't usually use the speaker notes when I'm speaking, but having them there as a fallback in case I totally panic or have really bad stage fright or something along those lines, it helps me a lot.
And those are really great, by the way, Ollie, for when you share out the deck afterwards, so people can look at the speaker notes and get an understanding not just of what's on the slide, but what you were saying when that slide was up.
I lean about 50-50 on speaker notes versus not speaker notes for myself. But again, I put pretty much all the major points that I would want to hit in the notes, which kind of helps me when I'm just practicing. Another thing I do is, so I practice not in front of a mirror or anything, but just in front of my laptop with the slides and all that stuff, kind of like I would if I was up on a stage. But I usually keep a piece of paper next to me, and if there's a place that I find myself just feeling where I'm just stuck, I got stuck on the thought I wanted to say, or I felt maybe I didn't include something in the slide that I wanted to include, or I'm just missing a point that I keep on wanting to hit, I make a note of it, and then I when I try it again, I try to mentally go through, okay, what did I actually want to say there, and I talk it out in my head, but also to improve my notes there, because there's a good chance that I might get caught up while speaking there, and so then I can glance at my notes so that it's less of an issue, and it sometimes gives me confidence, because then as I start working out those areas that I struggle, then I start feeling more confident that the potential of me struggling live is going to be less.
I'll say that when I'm doing practicing, I try to practice in a manner that is consistent with what the presentation is going to be like. So if it's a talk that's going to be recorded, then I'll practice at my desk with my microphone and camera, even if they're not on, so that I have that sense of attachment to the environment that I'll be giving the talk in. Whereas if it's a talk that's going to be given live on stage, then I'll give it to the wall while I'm pacing around my office, walking back and forth, because I know that's what I'm going to be doing on stage. So just making sure that you have that sort of correlation, and you have that, I don't know what the word would be, equality maybe, equilibrium, sure, between your practice and your final presentation. I think that helps the practice segment a lot.
Wow, so many good tips. So I'll share what I'm doing, and it really depends on my mood. So I either record myself and make myself watch it and fine tune the different areas, or there is an online PowerPoint, and in the PowerPoint online there is a presenter coach. I don't know if you ever tried it, but it's really awesome because it capture how long you've been doing the presentation, so it keeps time for you. It gives you notification during your presentation when you're training on varying your pitch, or if you're repeating phrases, maybe some sensitive phrases, what is your pace? And at the end, it produces a report. So you got your rehearsal report, and there is a score for originality, a score for sensitive phrases, pitches, pace, and total summary of how many slots, how long you rehearsed. So I think that's really helpful, and I sometimes do that, and sometimes I will record myself and make myself look at the recording. Yeah, so 2 options for you to choose from.
I never knew about this presenter coach, and that is amazing. I'm going to share that here in the space too. I brought up a few people with questions, and I think Alex, you were first. So go ahead, and if you have a question for the panel or comment.
Well, I wanted to thank Addy for shouting out to Developer Avocados as half of developeravocados.net. I was really proud of that moment. But I wanted to ask everybody to share a little bit about their success rates and their failures, and kind of help set expectations for everybody. Because when I started out, the rejection rates I was going were maybe 1 out of 10. I got 1 out of 10 CFPs through, and that got me really down until I understood that was normal. And even now, my rejection rate hasn't really improved, but I like to hear other people talk about theirs, just to see how it is for other people.
I mean, frankly, 1 out of 10 is pretty good. I know people that have put in 20 or 30 CFPs and have never had a talk accepted. So that's pretty good.
I will caveat mine with, I'm very picky where I put in CFPs. I'm probably at about 50 to 60% accepted. So I'm picky where I put them in. I sometimes gear an abstract to that specific conference. I tweak it a little bit so it's not as much as just like repeatedly putting in the exact same abstract to a bunch of places. And when I say I'm picky, I'm also like really making sure that the talk I'm giving, I know that the organizers probably want to talk on that topic. Like I'm going into it with that kind of like level of either just background knowledge or just assumption based on what their descriptions are and stuff. So I will say it's also more niche conferences, so not like super general. I sometimes think those have better success rates because there's just less people talking on some of those topics too.
I'll mirror what Taylor's mentioning, which is that I often hear about these lower CFP success rates, and I've never been able to relate to them. And I think that that is a differentiating factor. My CFP success rate tends to be fairly high because I usually submit multiple targeted conference specific CFPs to the same conference. Knowing that one of those or multiple of those will likely be denied and I'll only speak on one of those topics. But typically when I submit, it's like I'm very in the mind of I want to speak to that audience. I have something specific for them. I justify that in the reasoning as part of the proposal to the organizers. Why is this important for this audience in particular? And it takes a lot more energy, I think, but I haven't had a very low failure, or I've had a very low failure rate in that regard. Always been something I really couldn't relate with other folks, so it's really helpful to hear that from you, Taylor.
I also have pretty high acceptance rate. That being said, I think the biggest thing for me has been the shiny new technology talks have astronomically high acceptance rates, I've noticed, whereas older technology talks don't do as well. So I had one that was like on web ready augmented reality in 47 lines of code, and that talk had 100% acceptance rate, just because it was like so new and nobody else was really talking about it. And funny enough, it wasn't a topic that I was like doing at work or anything like that. It was just something that I was interested in. That being said, I had a talk about CSS art, and I only got that accepted at invited conferences. Nobody via CFP ever accepted that. So it's really interesting the different types of talks that people will accept. I think that, again, the new shiny ones tend to get pushed through pretty easily, whereas more stable ones or talks that multiple people are giving or on that topic, it becomes a little bit more difficult to get them accepted.
And just to add to that, Henry noted this earlier, and I had echoed some of these thoughts earlier as well. But the acceptance rate for meetup groups is damn near 100%, right? Worst case scenario, they say not this month but next month. But if you really want to get out there, if you want to give some talks, if you want to share your knowledge or get some experience, there's really no better way than meetup groups. And I find that if you have a meetup group that's capable of recording the presentation that you give, and then you can share that at a conference. Hey, I want to give this talk at your conference. Bam, right away, you're going to get a much better acceptance rate.
Yeah, I also wanted to say about acceptance rate. Like developers, like tech people, for example, they sometimes really experienced and professional people, but not always a good writers or not always can express themselves. And I kind of do wonder if there is a way, maybe the organizers can give some tips or tricks, or people who had the same problem, how to basically recognize if you're a bad writer or your topic is not actually a good one, or maybe you just cannot express what you want to give people. But in general, you might be an awesome speaker in the end and awesome expert in your area. If there is any thoughts on this.
I'll speaking as now someone that has a little bit of a confidence lowered because only 2 of my last 12 CFPs have been accepted. I will say that I've found that I was a terrible writer in certain ways by having someone else proofread the work and just say, hey, can you read this for me? And there's so many gaps and assumptions that I made about my writing were just missing because I assumed the other person had the same level of experience or something that I either didn't define a term or I didn't give background about something. So those are areas that to me, I try to privately have someone proofread it, usually 2 people, not necessarily direct coworkers, but just like, hey, people on Twitter, people on LinkedIn, someone can someone just read this and just give me like a quick yes or no, this sounds good, or you understood it or not.
I also use the Grammarly editor to do all my editing for a lot of my abstracts. partially because it also tells me at like the whole, or any kind of editor that can like give you kind of like a, what is the reading comprehension level of this? Because if it's super high, it's gonna make it hard for someone when you're like, when you're, okay, so backing up, when you're looking at CFP abstracts, some of these conferences now are asking reviewers to review quite a few. Like we're talking on the level of like 100. Some it's more like, 50 or 40, but still that is a lot. And so you have to be able to read that abstract and really quickly make a judgment. Otherwise you're going to be spending hours and hours and hours on it. So that's been something that's been helpful to help edit myself.
Another great value that comes from that is, so many of the people who come and talk and engage with us at these conferences and other spaces, English is not their first language. And oftentimes, when I write out what flows from my brain, it doesn't really make sense to people who are not native English speakers. And using tools like Grammarly can help me simplify my language in a way that makes it more comprehensible by non-native speakers.
I also think using tools in order to actually extract negative feedback from people is really important too. So we've talked a little bit about doing like thumbs up, thumbs down, but then the other thing that you can do is you can ask them to summarize in their own words what your talk is about. And if it's on point, that's a good sign that you did well. And if it's not, then probably you could refine it a little bit better. Another thing that you can do is ask people, like, why, if this talk was not accepted, why do you think it wouldn't be accepted, or something like that? Because oftentimes giving negative feedback is not natural for people, especially if they are your friends. They'll say like, oh, this is awesome, like you'll totally get accepted. But if you try a little bit harder to get the harsh criticism out from them by asking those pointed questions, it can help too to get more honest feedback.
One of my favorite questions of all time is, how could I consider doing this differently? Because it really frames, solicitation of feedback in a way that's non-confrontational, and I find that it results in better delivery of feedback.
I do wish some program committees that maybe don't have humongous volumes that they're dealing with could, at least on demand, give a little bit of feedback why a talk wasn't. If there's like low hanging fruit, I've had people ask me in the past, and I've told them, what is interesting about that though is the people who have asked me are also the ones writing the abstracts that are 2 sentences long, and it's been really tough for me because I'm like, so I basically just have to tell them, you just need to develop. I need to understand what this talk is more about. It's nothing about the idea or anything. It's just like this isn't enough. But it's hard to say that in a gentle way sometimes. But so for people who are writing fairly good abstracts and getting them rejected, I would hope that, maybe at least someone could kind of give you a little bit of hope to understand why.
I also, like before we were talking a bit about like how to build the abstracts itself, like there could be a story, and it's also, I think, quite important to set expectations right in an abstract, because now also like struggling sometimes how to write it correctly and how to do this properly. But sometimes as a listener, for example, on the conferences, if I see technical abstract with some technologies in it and I end up just listening in story, which could be a great story, but my expectations was different, I kind of can get a level of disappointment. So I think it's also quite important to get a couple of points from the talk you're trying to prepare. Like if there is going to be a demo, if you're going to show something, if you're going to just talk about technical details, or you just want to give a story to people, and also try to kind of hide it a little bit in your abstract so people can have the right expectations. I think so. I don't know, maybe there's other thoughts on this.
That's a really good idea. I'm almost thinking now that maybe we're not doing enough in tools like Sketch and these other kind of abstract display tools. It's almost like we should be, as a conference, kind of making a best effort to tag or allow submitters to tag their talks, with like hey, I'm doing a live demo in this, you know, or I am going to be talking about a use case here. Some of that is handled by conferences that pick tracks, right? So there will be like a technical track that's more demo heavy, and there will be a business track or a use cases track that shows end users, you know, talking about their stories. But that would be a really cool experience as a conference attendee to say, hey, show me all of the talks that we'll be doing live demos today, because I really like learning in that format. And I never thought about that until you mentioned it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was thinking. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the just thing I was going to add was I don't see organizers promoting this very much, but just being okay with accepted talks to maybe slightly tweak their abstract. I mean, I'm hoping that the speaker isn't going to totally change the topic because we accepted that abstract. But sometimes if you write the CFP in May and the talk is in December, a lot can happen between those 2 points in how you think about the talk and develop it and stuff. And it would be nice to be able to actually update the abstract for attendees.
Yeah,
So,
I started to think about this topic because as a being kind of a new speaker, sometimes overthink and trying to deliver and do your best, and in the end, like how can I let people know that I'm gonna tell them a little bit of story and give them a bit of a technology, and I'm also gonna show the demo, and I wanted people to know about this because I know that people might be interested in a specific. Like they're seeking for some for demo for technical parts. So I was just questioning myself, and I was just curious if there's like anyone have an idea how to actually solve this, let's say like this.
I think, it's also about developing your style for writing a CFP. So a little bit what I said in the beginning, you have kind of a signature. Once you practice it and you find the structure about how you put together the story and the CFP that tells the story of the talk, of the presentation that you want to do, then it will become easier for you to write a new proposal every time. So every time you have a new technology that you would like to talk about, to propose, it will become easier the more you do it. Just because you're already practiced and trained yourself into and develop your own style and pattern. If you don't yet have your own style and pattern, what I do recommend is going to conferences that you appreciate. Look at the CFPs that speakers put in that got approved, and try to break it down into what exactly they're mentioning, what the story, where is the pain point, if there is a hero story there, or if just they're doing they're doing like intro to some new open source, if they're telling kind of a production story from production crisis they had. And once you look at these, you will find patterns, and then you can start styling your own proposals, and make it, bring your voice into it and make it your own. This is what I did in the beginning. It was super helpful. I didn't know where to start, so I went to the conferences and I looked at the talks. I watched the videos. If I could, most times I couldn't attend, so I watched the videos, watched the recordings, and I just took the proposal, broke it down, marked next to each line what this line conveys, why is it there, why is it important. And this is kind of how I developed my style, by learning from others. So I hope it's helpful.
This is really helpful, to be honest. And you reminded me of how I was actually trying to understand how I can speak, not write an abstract, but actually how I can tell my story to people. I did the same. I went to conferences to people I appreciate, I like listen to, and I was sitting and watching over and over again, trying to understand why I like watching them. What is it? There is like this. It's not only about technical part. They also were telling the story and how they were challenged. So I basically did exactly the same, just writing down what is actually was why it was interesting to listen. and it did help me a lot. Like, of course, this is like something you have to work on like constantly, but it helped me to start and at least not to be that scared of my first talking experience, you know.
I wanted to start to wrap this up. Thank you so much for the conversation. I know Ali had to drop. And Lee, did you have a specific question? I know you came up here earlier and we just never kind of got to you.
Oh, I mean, I got to kind of contribute a couple of points. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, it's been awesome jumping on here. I kind of popped in, noticed it in the middle.
Cool. Yeah, and thanks so much for jumping up and giving your experience with that too. So I think we will just wrap up. There's a ton of links here in this thread. I'm adding a couple more from DMs and resources that I found. If you're interested at all in giving a talk somewhere, I think the fundamentals of, if you're getting started, start at some meetups, start with lightning talks, and then if you're trying to write a CFP, look at other examples. Look what exists already. Go find a conference and read the ones that you liked. Find a talk that you thought was great and see what worked for them, and then turn that into your own voice and kind of make it your story and really connect with it in a way that you have unique perspective. Even if you don't think that you have a story, if you think, oh, this is just my life, that's interesting. That's interesting to a lot more people than you might believe. And so tell your story. It'll resonate with people, and people will come to your talk that have a similar background and want to learn things that you've been learning too. So with that, thank you everyone for coming, listening. I am going to try to put this up on YouTube later this week. It'll probably be on my YouTube channel, so I'll put it in this thread as well if you're following. And thank you so much for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Super cool.
Thank you.